There, we've gotten past Bing. We've gotten to YouTube. Bing, that was super weird. Hello to all you patriots out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 377 of Canadian Patriot Podcast, the #1 live book club podcast in Canada. We're recording on December 26, 2022.
We need your help to support the Canadian Patriot Podcast. Visit patreon.com/CPP and become a Patreon. You can get a better quality version of the show for just $1 per episode. Show you're not a communist. Buy a CPP t-shirt for just $24.99, plus shipping and theft. I can't speak. Visit CanadianPatriotPodcast.com homepage and follow the link on the right.
This takes us to my favorite segment. It's called What Are We Drinking? And an item on the Patriot Challenge that you've recently completed. As is tradition, we will start with Liz. Liz, what are you drinking?
Tonight, I am drinking the same thing I was drinking last week. Cowbell Brewing Co. A draft nitro stout.
I'm still excited, so that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
And what have you worked on the Patriot Challenge recently?
I feel like I've worked on a lot of things, but my life has been a little bit busy and all over the place. So I guess the most recent thing that I kind of worked on that I haven't done is I actually baked cookies. And nice. That sounds, I haven't done that in a long time. I don't even know if I've ever made shortbread cookies before. And this is where last week we talked about the kale. Peter's already shaking his head. I colored the icing using dehydrated and powdered kale instead of using food coloring. You can't taste it. You can't taste it. I
was not reacting to you. I have the football game on in the background.
That's the worst. No.
Sorry.
No. So it was actually good. I had rave reviews about my cookies. So my domestic skills. I know you guys were pretty critical. Actually, no, Peter, you were critical. Everybody else was like, "That's cool. What a great idea."
Because they're all a bunch of vegetarian weirdos.
I mean, it's an idea. I'll give you that part.
Yeah,
it turned to green. It worked well.
Right. So here's my gig. And one of the reasons why I tried it out is because I'm actually not a huge vegetable lover, but they're necessary.
It's bad for you.
They're not actually bad for you. I have some mineral deficiencies because I don't like vegetables.
So you don't eat enough meat.
That's also not true. Have you seen me? I'm 6 foot tall. I got fed well as a child. Okay. So, that's not the problem.
It's a weird brag.
What, that I'm 6 feet tall and I got fed well? Well, it's usually because you have more meat. You're fed more meat as a kid. That's usually.
I wasn't fed well. I turned out okay.
You were not fed well. Some people it's just genetics, but I'd like to. Yeah, I'm going to go with that as a brag. I was fed meat at every meal growing up. So
good parents.
Yeah,
that's a brag.
And it was all raised. Most of it, actually, I think. Growing up, we always had like a couple of cows and a pig in the barn specifically for meat. So nice. It was, and rabbits too, and chickens and ducks and stuff. So it was all like homegrown stuff. But yeah, so I'm trying my domestic, skills of incorporating vegetables into things that I wouldn't normally like, just to get that vegetable consumption. So, and especially in the winter's really hard for me. I find as much as I'm like Canadian to the bone, I do really struggle with like lack of sunlight and not being outside as much. So eating vegetables and getting certain vitamins in, really important. So I'm just kind of trying to develop that skill. So there you go. Developed a skill.
Cool.
Yeah. Next is Peter.
I am drinking a What the Hell's lager from Torque Brewing. It has a pig flying on it. my camera works. Doesn't matter. I've been reading a lot. It's been great. I didn't finish this book, but sorry. And
I didn't start the book.
Oh, fair enough. I started it yesterday. I got 20%. I feel pretty good about it.
That's a lot.
It's not bad. I have been exercising by slowly working on shoveling all of my backyard into one big pile for the kids. So that's been fun. We have a ditch in the back, and I shoveled that whole thing out last night and added that to the hill. And so we had a good time with that today. But that's been good. I don't know if I've practiced the skill per se. Well, yeah, maybe not true. We got this. I don't know if you guys know what slack lines are.
Yes.
Yeah, so we got like the ninja line, so it's got like stuff hanging off of it the kids can go nuts on.
Oh,
And
that's
I
fun.
needed so yesterday I was figuring out how I could anchor it in my basement properly, because it's made to just loop around 2 trees. So I had to find a creative way to anchor it in my basement yesterday, and we figured it out with some 2x6 and GRKs and got her good. But so that was working on problem solving, I guess, on things that are somewhat structural.
I mean, it sounds like a construction-y kind of carpentry type task.
Yeah, which is different than what I usually do. So,
but it's also like
expanding
doing something to build a skill.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's holding so far. It's been 2 days. Not bad. We'll take it.
That's good. That's a good start. Solid proof of concept.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Andrew?
I am drinking a Railway City Brewing's Elgin's Finest Wee Heavy, a Scottish style ale. It's 7.5%.
Is that a lot?
It's not
Normal
a little.
beers
Well, I mean,
are
I guess
like
it's technically it is a
5-ish.
little because it's a wee heavy. But
Oh yeah, I guess this beer is only 4.2.
so I would say your
American.
your average beer falls in the 4 to 5% range is sort of a normal.
Yours is still blurry.
Yeah, it's the
your
blur, and
potato
I'm
is
using my
very out of
phone.
focus.
Yeah.
So solid wintry timey beer.
There we go. Torque Brewing.
There we go.
What the hell is?
A Helles Lager.
Oh, okay. I was like, what the hell is?
What the hells?
Well, yeah. Play on words. Haha. Good job.
It's very good. As for skills and Patriot Challenge and things, I am slacking because it is the holiday season. I have not exercised. I have eaten a gluttonous amount of food. We had schnitzel for Christmas. It was so good. Schnitzel and spetzel. Schnitzel and
I like it.
spetzel.
What is spetzel?
Like
This
noodles.
This is
Yeah.
very German. Oh, okay. What goes normally with schnitzel, right? Is okay. I just
Yeah.
didn't know it was called
Noodles. Yeah. So it was a slightly
it's
German
Kilkia down
Christmas.
that. Yeah. It's what did you say?
It's
Peter?
Kilkia down here.
Okay. I
What
have to look
is
and see if
that?
that's different than spetzel.
I don't know if it's different, but it is Low German out here, so it might be
Oh.
the same thing with just a different word.
Different word, different name. So yeah, we've eaten way too much food, and there's
Fair.
still pie in the fridge that we haven't even started yet because we didn't even get into all the desserts, and it's been a whole
It's been a whole
adventure.
thing. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know. I feel like I did reasonably well. We survived Snowmageddon with like minimal impact to our living situation.
Fair.
I mean, obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious. For longtime listeners of the podcast, they will know that I reside in Southern Ontario. And Southern Ontario, along with most of Canada, Manitoba excluded, sorry, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say, apparently Manitoba was fine.
Yeah, Manitoba apparently doesn't have weather.
Yeah.
Beginning to think
We did that already.
Manitoba maybe just doesn't exist.
Well,
Maybe.
I've
I mean, people
driven
are
through
usually sleeping on their way.
You ever met anybody from Manitoba?
I have, yeah.
My cousin actually lives in Winnipeg right now.
But that's because you claim. Well, okay, so maybe Liz knows. You know this
and my
person.
aunt just flew out there this morning.
I don't know that.
See what it
Maybe.
is, what the actual explanation is, and I probably shouldn't say this, but Manitoba is actually where all the real people live, and all of you are just living in the matrix.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
that
That's
would explain why you don't get
probable.
weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all
But
simulation, my boy.
I will say though
Could
that
be.
as crappy as the weather was over the last few days, I was like still ready to do life. It's just nobody else was ready to do it. And the cops were like, you shouldn't. I was like,
So
well,
understandably, a lot of roads in southern Ontario were closed because people can't drive, as indicated by
that's, I think, the difference.
Well, I mean, I understand when there's like 100-car pileup on the 401, the police are like, you know what, maybe people shouldn't drive. But I mean, my perspective is those people probably shouldn't drive any day, not just on that day.
Right.
As a general, like,
So
you live in Toronto. Yeah, you just shouldn't have a car. That would solve that. Like you're from Toronto. You're just not allowed to drive.
Well, and to be fair, I watched a video of part of the crash. There was, I don't know if there was more than one, like the 401 and the 402, but
the 401, the 402, there were multiple crashes. There was
yeah.
a OPP officer involved in a traffic collision. He got clipped by a car out towards Hamilton area.
Yeah, like
that kind of stuff ticks me off.
Why?
But this is what I mean. This is the, and
Everybody should know.
But this is the thing, though. Anyway. These people should just not be out driving because they're not competent people.
You're gonna clip a cop.
Well, that's half the problem. So I watched this video, and my family and I kind of went back and forth in debate because we're watching this video on the 402, and we're watching like 18-wheelers literally rip the cabs off of each other as they're sliding into them. This guy has it all on video, and it's wild. And it's like, for a second there, I thought we honestly had just watched some dude get killed because it was going. But then you've got these other people that are getting out of their cars and, stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I kind of get what's going on. Like, this is pretty weird. Everybody's trying to figure it out. But I'm like, all of these vehicles are in the middle of a blizzard driving, which again, if you're going the right speed, I'm not that worried about it. If you know that you can stop on a dime, I'm not that worried about it. But the speed that these guys were all going in the visibility, I'm like, okay, that's like driving 101.
This is my problem. This is why I'm not upset that OPP and municipal police forces in Southern Ontario and probably lots of other parts of Canada all were like, we're just gonna, everything's gonna close for Christmas. We just all close for Christmas. Just everybody stay home.
Like barricades were up in like Stratford and around my area.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. And I was like,
these things happen. Winter storm warnings are a thing.
For sure. And I mean, you're right. There's some people, like I drive a really big truck. Andrew, you drive a really big truck. It's fine.
It's an average size truck.
I know, but for most people, compared to Volkswagens, they're really big trucks.
Why are we shit talking Volkswagen? Those are the people's car.
I know, but the point is
trash to fix.
Well, there's that, but getting through
all European cars are trash to work on.
Also, getting through snowdrift is not necessarily their forte either. So
no,
that's a Kia.
Yeah, and also when I think of small trucks, I think of like Tacomas or Rangers. We're big trucks, but we're not the biggest truck, right?
But we could be.
No,
my dad's been driving around his 3500 all weekend.
Yeah,
because he had to drive a couple of Amish people around. Well, some Amish people, one lady's about to have her baby, and and the other family, and these are friends of our family, but the other family, their kid had his appendix burst, so he was in the hospital all weekend. His 10-year-old. Yeah, so my dad was driving this Amish family back and forth to the hospital all weekend. So he just had the big 3500 out, and they stopped to tow somebody out of the ditch. So.
But I mean, this is the difference. If you have a vehicle that's appropriate for the weather and you're not driving like a crazy person, doing 100 in a blizzard on the 401.
Yeah.
So as a result of all of these things, I've read and I've eaten a lot and I've drank a lot and I've made merry and done all of the other festive holiday things. Amazing. I had steak for the first day of Yule because that was Wednesday.
There you go.
And I basically started cooking for the first of Yule, and I haven't really stopped eating since then.
Did you make Dave homemade pizza?
Yeah.
Dang, that's commitment.
Got pizzas in the freezer. They're not going to eat themselves.
What do you mean? You made pizzas and then put them in the freezer?
Well, like the pizza kits, like a pizza,
Oh,
some assembly
Oh.
required pizza, like an IKEA pizza.
got it.
Less meat.
Got
base.
it. So like
So
not
not quite homemade.
not
I am
quite
not.
homemade.
I don't have the patience to do the dough from the scratch, or the pepperoni from scratch, or cheese from scratch. But if you give me the component parts, I'm happy to do the assembly work.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, I mean, I think I would try the dough. Obviously, I have zero idea how to make pepperoni. My sister makes cheese, so I could
I
probably
think
get
you
in
need
on
a
that.
pig. I think if you have a pig, you're on your way to pepperoni.
I mean, my sister raises the pigs that we eat all year.
So I think you're partway there.
I'm partway there. My mom just got a meat grinder for Christmas, a new meat grinder
Oh,
for
man.
Christmas.
Oh,
So
A little jealous. A little jealous.
I don't think you understand how my family operates. Like, I got a treadle sewing machine for Christmas.
Nice.
So that's one of those ones that doesn't require any electricity.
Yep.
Yeah.
I may need some sewing lessons. I was looking at my mom's new sewing machine. She got a sewing machine and she's got like an enormous Husky Viking.
Okay.
Yeah, it does everything. I was trying to figure out how to like load embroidery files on it. It's
like it's one of those.
it's an impressive sewing machine.
But the fact that
so
you
Andrew can learn to
load-
make patches.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
I mean, yeah, we could do that too. I'm mostly intimidated by the enormous like
The fact that you have to
semi-automated sewing
load-
machine.
Yeah, the fact that you have to load files onto it blows my mind. Like, we went the other direction.
That's
You know?
what in either event, I probably need to learn how to improve my sewing as a skill that I should work on. So I can mend a button and I can do like
You
I
don't
can
need
do
a
hem.
sewing. I was gonna say you don't need a sewing machine for a button. Please don't use a sewing machine for a button.
Buttonhole would work way better with a sewing machine.
Yeah, I'm not as good as I need to be. Like, when we were kids growing up, because my mom homeschooled us, and my grandma, who my mom's mom, who passed away like, I don't know, 15 years ago, she was extremely capable in a lot of those domestic things. So my mom actually had us like go to her to learn our home ec stuff. So we all got to learn how to quilt and how to like sew and follow patterns and how to cook and stuff like that, and follow recipes from grandma. So, well, Grammy.
Nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know how to do some stuff, but the problem is that if you don't use it, you kind of lose it.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And a lot of skills are perishable like that. And some are easier to pick back up than others, but if you don't practice it regularly.
I have the best idea. I'll set up the quilting frame in the shed and you boys can all come over and quilt.
I'm busy that day. Sorry. I gotta wash my hair.
I don't know what you're trying to get at. I'm down. Like, let's make some quilts.
Okay, there you go. Peter's like, I have to wash my hair.
No, see, I'm more interested in getting the machines that turn wool into blankets.
Oh, okay.
And learning how to do that. That's what I want to learn.
My aunt is a fiber artist, so she takes everything. Yeah, like, and she's been doing it for years. So she's been raising sheep and alpaca and all that stuff for as long as I remember. And then she has gone all the way from like, shearing, like raising and shearing, to like dyeing, to spinning, to weaving. So I have a whole bunch of, she's very impressive. And she has some like antique apparatuses as well, like some sock making machines from, the wartime era. And they're kind of like hand crank and they like make socks. It's very impressive, but she operates in like wool. So yeah.
I like wool.
So we may need to talk. We may need to talk later.
Yeah. Don't worry. She's part of our compound.
In the market for some wool blankets. So
okay. Well, I also found some at a local organic store, and I have one wool blanket on my bed, and honestly that's all I use to sleep with. It's that warm. Like, it's shocking.
I'm looking for like 6 thinner ones.
Yeah, they're
6 to 8 thinner ones.
Like, okay. For some bags?
For camping and go bags and
yeah.
a few different things where they'll get stashed.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, well, message me later. I'll get you hooked up.
Book
All
club?
right. Book club. I was
Listener
actually just checking to see if there's any listener feedback while we learned all about quilting, which I'm gonna work on my quilting. Oh, you know what? Next week, tune in. New year, new you. Let's we'll do some New Year's resolutions. Maybe
I'm down.
maybe I will resolve to make a quilt with Liz.
Yeah, because I need to brush up on that skill. Like it's been a long time.
All right. Tune in next week to find out that there is nothing in the inbox. If you want to send us hate mail, you can do that. Feedback at CanadianPatriotPodcast.com.
my internet.
And I don't know what's gone on with Peter. Something's happening. Maybe the World Juniors game got very exciting.
I don't
know. Unclear. Make more faces the camera. Oh, okay then. Well, on to book club. This month, I don't know. This has been a weird couple of months. We are doing an autobiography of sorts. I guess it's not of sorts. It really just is an autobiography.
Yep.
A Soldier First by General Rick Hillier.
This, out of all the books, this is definitely one that I seriously considered joining book club for, but I just ran out of time.
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of months, and then Yule was on us, or I guess I'm the only pagan on. Christmas was upon you.
Yes.
Christmas came on you. Christmas came for you.
Pardon?
I'm not sure. Yes. Tis
Christmas
the season.
was upon us.
Somebody was born. It was great.
Yeah. Yep.
Still counting time by it, so that's not bad.
Yeah.
True.
Solstice.
There you go.
something pagan holidays. Anyway, we did for November/December. I have finally finished reading Rick Hillier's autobiography. It only took me 3 months. That's not a reflection of the book. That's just a reflection of my ability to read.
But you got Post-it notes all in your book, so that's a good
I
sign.
do. Well, that's because you can tell I read it because I made Post-it notes, and because of my my particular brand of autism, I can't defile the book by writing in the margins. So I write on the Post-it notes.
I can't do that either. I find that to be really challenging.
Yeah, I can't bring myself to write in a book. Like, what if I want to give it to somebody? Or what if I write something silly?
Or what? Yeah, I think it's the writing something silly, because I've gone back into like some of my course notes before, and where I had done that, where I'd written notes in the margins, and then you go back and you read it again, a couple years later, and you're like,
what was I even doing? How many drugs was I on?
Yeah. And I don't really want that refresher. I want to be able to read through a book again with like a fresh mind, where I'm just not. I
totally get that. So
I'm not impeded by that.
Make my notes on my Post-its, put my Post-its in my book. After book club, I'll take my Post-its out. But Rick Hillier.
Tell me who that is.
Probably somebody that would be interested in making a quilt.
Okay.
Born in Newfoundland in 1955, grew up in a home that didn't have running water.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not surprising.
It's weird to me how there are parts of Canada that, like, because 1955 doesn't seem like that long ago.
Yeah, but I think that Newfoundland is like a couple of decades behind. And not as much now. I think as it progresses, it's not as much. But no, I've heard that though, because even on the East Coast. But even on the East Coast, yeah, like it's not. We used to go out to the East Coast all the time because a couple of my uncles lived out there. One uncle still does, and honestly, different world out there.
I think that they're a couple decades behind in a good way, other than their politics.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think that like the culture in the East Coast is, very friendly, very welcoming, but yeah, like a little bit more laid back and slow paced, and that
it's also more community based.
Yeah, for sure.
Which again, I can totally get behind. So Hillier, born in.
Can I not hear you for a reason, Andrew?
You muted yourself.
I have somehow managed to both mute and unmute myself at the same time.
Oh,
I am Schrodinger's microphone. Apparently, I can mute the microphone without muting it in Zoom. That's super weird and uncomfortable. Anyway, Hillier, 1955, Newfoundland. church, community, high school, goes to Greenwood, all of the exciting things, decides to enlist into the army.
At 17.
Some issues enlisting into the army. Still a teenager. Parents aren't super on board with it. He ends up going into the regular officer training program, and I think he tried to get into RMC but didn't, and he ended up going to Memorial University in Newfoundland. I think
that's what I remember.
Excellent. Good. Then my post notes are reasonably accurate. So he becomes an officer. He goes into the army. He decides, he goes through basic training. He decides he's going to be an armored officer and be involved in tanks.
Ooh,
and
fun.
I can respect that.
1972 or so, when he goes into the army, we're still driving Centurions, like World War II, barely World War II era tanks. So these tanks are already like 40 years old when he gets them. So good times. Hillier, we'll go through the book, but he rises through the officer ranks. He gets married. He has some kids. He ends up becoming the chief of defense staff and retiring out of the army as the ranking officer, as the most senior person in charge of the whole military in Canada. And he retired out in 2008, the 1st of July of 2008. He had been in for a reasonably long time and got to see and do a bunch of very interesting things.
That makes sense. I've heard some stories of people that have been military. Interesting things is true.
Hillier's an interesting guy. I mean, like, starting out with like almost not getting into the military, almost not getting into a trade in the military, almost not completing the trades training in the military to become an armored officer, not through his fault, but just because the way the training was in the early 70s was just not well run or well organized. And there were instructors in the early 70s that were just trying to get people to quit.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Like, just how many recruits can I have that just give up? Like, how many people can I get to quit the army before they're really even in the army?
To that, though, I'm kind of not like super upset with that model because I think. Go ahead.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. I think I know where you're going with this. It's still, you still have some semblance of that in some of the specialty trainings in North America, where like the obvious famous one is Navy SEAL training, right? Like going through BUDS is hell on earth, and it's literally the hardest thing you'll ever do.
It's a testing of your fortitude, right?
But they are not trying to make you quit. They're testing your ability to its ever living limits.
Yeah. Which could be seen as trying to make you quit. But
it's different. It's different than like, oh, what's the word? Like, there's a different mindset behind it. From the way that Rick laid it out there, it sounded like they weren't trying to make it difficult just to make people better. They were literally trying to get rid of these guys.
No, there was
just messing with them.
They were just trying to get them to quit.
Yeah. Nothing else behind it.
That's a weird, like, crony kind
of. It is,
like...
but it's the Cold War, and it's a weird point in our military. And Hillier's career spans all of the weird points in our military.
There's part of me also wonders, though, like, that was a serious time. Like, so during that time, actually very similar timeline, my uncle was military police, and he, was over in Germany and did, like a whole bunch of different stuff. And the impression I'm left with, though, is that that's also the era when there's like an exceedingly high amount of corruption, both in the military, but also like that was the time that all those stories came out about the police, both in the States and in Canada, and like just kind of how they were kind of mob-like and very like organized crime within these industries and within these institutions. And I think a lot of the time when we think of military, we think, oh, well, they're like a law enforcement. They have a code of ethics. No, they're not. It's a job. That's why they have their own police. That's why they have their own police, because they are not self-regulating. They are like dudes, like at the time, mostly dudes, just like everybody else on the street. Like it's not the same. Like I think a lot of people have this idea.
It's a very different mentality.
Yeah.
And it's very weird. This is like 3 decades that is very weird and transformative in world history, and particularly in the Canadian military. Is like Hillier goes into this, and the Cold War is maybe not quite at its peak, but it's pretty up there, right? The early to mid 70s is very Cold War-y, right? The Americans have only just recently put people on the moon.
Yeah, because that was the
Cuba
60s?
Missile Crisis wasn't 64, right? 1964.
I think so, something like that. Let me look it up.
Okay, you intern that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that are happening. The mid to late 60s, so they're just into the early 70s. He goes into the Army. The Army is still running World War II era equipment. The Canadian military is still running tanks that weren't quite brand new in World War II.
Yeah.
We're still sending people to Germany on a regular basis. We're still 69, not 64. That's a good point. Thank you. Moon landings were 1969. July 11, 1969. Is that
July 20th? Close.
So close.
I mean,
so close.
Pretty
well
good
done.
Price is Right answer.
Yep.
Well, at least I didn't go over. Yeah, 70s is super weird. Cold War still going on. Russian invasion is still the thing that NATO and the UN are training for. And the Canadian military is spending a lot of time, like a lot of Western countries, in Germany, because that's where we're doing all of our training in preparation of the Russians invading the western part of Europe.
Well, at that point, everybody was still willing to shit on Germany, so why not?
Well, and I mean, they're basically still an occupied country at that. Well, yeah. I shouldn't say basically. They were an occupied country. Both East and West Germany were occupied states at that point in time.
Yeah, because that wasn't until 89.
Well, that was going to be my next history question, was what year did the wall come down? And that was in 89.
I think it was 89.
Yep. Yeah, it was.
Right.
Yes.
So
well, the wall came down in the 90.
November 9th, 1989. The fall of the Berlin Wall.
All right. That was close.
Right. So the USSR crumbles.
Yeah.
And then Canada decides the thing to do to deal with the recession in the 90s is to cut military spending. And we go into the decade of darkness, and it is not a good time. The upside, late 1970s, we get new tanks, which relevant to Hillier being an armored officer, we get the Leopard
Leopard
C2, the Leopard 1?
C1s.
Leopard C1. We're on the Leopard C2 now, right? We're on the 2nd gen now?
Yeah, that was the Leopard C2 was like early 90s, late 80s, but we didn't start getting them until probably last year.
Yeah,
that's when the Germans started having them.
I don't really know anything about tanks. They fascinate me.
Tanks are cool. Everybody likes tanks. Yeah. So they get the Leopards, which is a German-made tank. They get the Leopards. Fun anecdote in the book. The Leopard that Hillier drives in Germany, when they do their initial familiarization and acceptance testing of their first batch of Leopards, his tank actually ends up in Afghanistan 30 years later.
Oh.
Yeah, that same tank.
Is it one of the ones
Sorry, quick side note on us using German tanks. So because we're Canadians and we have to make everything that we buy Canadian in some way, we bought the Leopards off the Germans and then decided to put our own target acquisition software in it, so that you just point and shoot, right? However, they didn't take into account that when you're not in cold weather, the little piece of steel on the top will expand in the heat and throw the aiming off, because it expands and moves 2 millimeters or something like that, 3 millimeters, and that's enough to throw all your aiming off. So when they were doing the Andrew, what's the name of the competition they were doing?
I don't remember. You get the Canada award if you win, though.
Yes.
The
they
what
went into that and
award?
they felt Canada
There's an
award 'cause
international
we started it.
tank competition
Yeah.
every year, and all of the NATO European powers all play.
War.
It's
And-
wargaming.
It's a war game. It's just a contest to
Is
see who's.
it it's like TNEMEC?
No,
Tank of the
Anyway.
year, whatever.
no. Anyway, so it's so they go in and they just can't hit shit. Like they didn't hit one target the whole time because
No.
their aiming systems were all off because Canada
'Cause
decided to do their own thing instead of just using the one that was on there.
Which continues to be a problem. And I mean, Hilliard talks about
Yeah.
it in the book. Throughout the book, it keeps coming up that procurement in Canada
Yes.
really fucking sucks.
Yes.
So we buy the best state-of-the-art German tank, and we put the best state-of-the-art targeting computer on it. But it is massively expensive and doesn't work in cold weather.
No, it only worked in cold weather.
Yeah, it didn't work because that's right, because they zero the tank in the morning, and in the afternoon
Yeah.
there was enough of a heat temperature difference that the aiming device would have moved a few millimeters and thrown the firing solution off.
Yep.
We went into Afghanistan in 2002.
Yeah.
We went into Afghanistan and we had brand new camouflage, like the the Canadian disruptive pattern uniforms, the relish looking uniforms. And the boys showed up to Roto 1 with only green. We went to invade a desert country wearing green.
Yeah.
In a desert country with brand new uniforms that were green.
Nice. Nailed it.
I just like it might be the Canadian Army Trophy. I'm not sure what the name of the award was.
Close enough.
Other fiscal blunders that we've had. The CF-18s.
Oh.
We're going to Afghanistan and we're using heavy lift airframes that are like 40 plus years old with the Hercs.
Oh, we couldn't with all the cuts, they decided because the Army and the Air Force couldn't decide who was going to be paying for the Chinooks, so we just sold them.
We
So
sold
we didn't have
all
any
the
heavy
Chinooks.
lift helicopters.
Yeah, so we sold
the
like a
Dutch.
dozen Chinooks to the Dutch. And then
the
we-
Dutch
again,
did
we-
all our
we went-
lifting.
We went to Afghanistan and we're like, dear Dutch Air Force, may we please have a ride on our helicopters?
Ugh. That sounds about right.
Right? He didn't touch on it, but he would have been in the military doing the Sea King stuff too, but that's probably not an Army problem.
Yeah, that would have been Navy.
But they did touch on that they were flying helicopters off of naval vessels that were not near the beginning of their service life.
Been repoed a couple of times.
Well, they go up okay, and they always come back down. It's just whether they go up and again after that is the part where it becomes questionable.
Yeah, it's how quickly they come back down, maybe.
Yeah, that tends to be the area where there's an issue. If they come down too quickly, they may not go back up again.
Yeah.
So we go through with the Chrétien and Martin governments and the Decade of Darkness, and there's the War on Terror kicks off. The World Trade Center attacks in 2001.
I was going to say that was 01, wasn't it?
Yeah, September 11, 2001, and we get dragged into with the Americans and the rest. Well, I shouldn't say the rest of NATO. A bunch of NATO. forces. We get dragged into
the ones that
Afghanistan.
fight.
Well, so the Brits and the French and
No, it's the Brits, the Canadians, and the Americans, and everybody else just tries not to get their guys killed because it's too much pain in
well,
politics.
I mean, we had the same problems. Hilliard talks about it at length. Troops on the ground, like regional, local commanders, people that were there that were in charge of units, couldn't get anything done because everything had to go back to Ottawa to get approved on. It just the same problems as in Bosnia. It's like we were not learning lessons, which actually that's one of the anecdotes about Bosnia. We did 20 something rotations in Bosnia, and every time we sent a battle group, it was like learning from scratch. 26 battle groups. So 26 individual sets of lessons learned that were never communicated to the next people to go.
Yep.
That's about right.
And then we see the same thing in Afghanistan. in 02 and 03. And in 04, the government had to make a decision if we were going to continue to be in Afghanistan or not, because the Canadian forces was roughly half the size that it should have been to keep up with the operational tempo. So just not enough manpower and equipment, which is all the result of 10 or 20 years of not having enough funding. And I mean, part of that, Hillier talks about disbanding the airborne after the incidents in Somalia, which comes up again in Afghanistan. That there's there were stories in Afghanistan that related to the potential mistreatment of prisoners, which very reminiscent of the Somalia stories, wherein the airborne got disbanded, which reprehensible and shouldn't have happened. Not that I think that like we should have people going around like torturing people, but to disband the airborne regiment over that was not, again, like not a good strategic decision for our military. But when everything's getting cut.
Well, and part of the way that he explained that one was that by disbanding it, you're saying that as leadership, we don't have the ability to get a hold on these guys and lead them properly and turn it around, right? We're saying we're giving up on them because we're not good enough leaders to actually follow through and make this a usable regiment. So we're just going to can it.
That's an interesting principle, though, because
yes, to a certain degree, but the politicians had already decided without conversing with the military leadership what they were going to do. Like it came down from political leadership, civilian government people that, like, I think it was the chief defense staff at the time, or maybe it was the minister of defense. Maybe it was Bob Fowler. Somebody had said,
no, it was the chief of defense.
Was it the chief of defense?
Yeah.
Somebody came in and they were like, you will disband the airborne regiment. And the military was like, okay, I guess we'll do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which, I mean, I don't know. Now all the Reg Force units have a jump company, which gives them better flexibility. And there's advantage having more units that are able to jump out of airplanes, as opposed to just having one regiment that could do it. Like PPCLI, RCR, and the Vandoos. So all the Reg Force infantry regiments all have a jump company, which I think is a direct result of the airborne regiment being disbanded. I think that's part of how they did the restructuring. So I don't think all the other infantry regiments before had jump qualified companies. They might have had people that were jump qualified, but not like whole company. So there is some flexibility with that, which I don't know how often we're going to be having people jump into combat out of C-130s, but better to give them the flexibility to do it than not.
Yeah, having the ability is more important than actually needing it.
Well, and you get into that a lot into Afghanistan in the 2000s. Is the 70s and 80s in Germany, same stuff every year, right? Like this year will be the same as last year. We're going to do some training. We're going to have some breaks. We're going to do some more training. Units will rotate, and then we start the cycle again for the next year. 3PCLI got put on alert for Afghanistan after September 11th, and we didn't have any units that were like high readiness standards in the country. So in order for us to deploy combat troops somewhere in the world is not a small ordeal. The Americans had like what are effectively quick reaction forces. The Americans can spin up in September of 2001. The Americans can spin up a division in like 3 or 4 days. I don't know if we had a whole division. We're certainly not spinning it up for combat operations.
We had divisions, but they weren't full.
Well, and this is part of the problem. Is like
they weren't at full fighting complement. I don't
even know if we could have spun up a whole regiment.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
But this is a very different, like we've gone from this very much peacetime military, and when Hillier gets into the military in the early 70s and goes through Germany and into the 80s, and then the cuts in the 90s and the lack of training and the lack of
training and continue like it actually blows my mind a little bit how many cuts and stuff they went through, like how much was slashed, and that they still were able to keep operations going as much as they did in Bosnia and Yugoslavia and Somalia, and all those places that we went to when we had no money for the military.
We had no money. We had no training. We had superb soldiers and leadership. I shouldn't. We had some superb leaders, maybe is the way to phrase that. Not that every leader was necessarily very good, but I think there's more often than not, there were senior officers like General Hillier who had gone through like really unnecessarily difficult training on their own to get into the positions they were in, which, and I mean, like, lots of respect for Hillier. The dude just wanted to run combat arms. Like, he just wanted to go be with the boys and go and do operations and go to Germany or go to Somalia or go to Yugoslavia or Bosnia. And he wanted to run combat arms units. So he ended up being, I think, probably the highlight in his career, Lieutenant Colonel, and he's in command of the Royal Canadian Dragoons. Right, and they go to Bosnia, and he'd work with the Dragoons and PET and some other units. But that's sort of the peak of his career is as a, I'm going to say, real soldier. Not as a paper pusher, but as somebody that's like, I actually have troops and tanks and things under my command, and I'm like directly responsible for making things happen, as opposed to every job he had after working at RCD, when he's at National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa, or when he's Chief of Land Forces, or I guess no, it's Chief of Land Staff, or later when he's Chief of Defense Staff, CDS. So he's not involved any longer in the tactical application of the military. It's all strategic planning,
politics, right? And politics.
It's all planning and budgeting and training and but he doesn't have dudes with big guns working directly for him anymore. He becomes, after being the CO of the Royal Canadian Dragoons, he's in a very different world. And I think that was sort of that was probably why he took some of the postings that he took, was he had the opportunity to go and actually like do real soldier things, actually like go out and do operations and perform mission tasks and have guys work directly for him. So like when he's running a tank squadron and there's like 4 tanks and he's responsible for those 4 tanks, like that's probably the coolest part of the job. And then he gets to be able to do all of the politics and run the land force and become CDS and do all of the other things he does after that. I think he was the I4 command or ISAF commander in Afghanistan at one point, right? He goes to run the international show in Afghanistan. I think he was running part or maybe all of the international show in Bosnia at one point. But he has all these subordinate units working for him. He's not actually running the units. And that was, I think, the thing that he really was trying to do for most of his career, was actually just get a regiment to be in charge of. I think we covered off all my points on the missing and broken and defective gear. Oh, you know what? I can't find my my post note for it, but I did have one more. Hillier was also in charge of units out of Petawawa during the ice storm and during the Red River flood. So Red River flooding happened, and then the ice storm happened. He was in charge of a bunch of stuff. Yes, the ice storm was in 98. Red River flooding was in
97. 97.
Was it? They were back to back? I thought, okay.
You know, it was 97.
I thought there was a couple of years interspersed.
That's like a big deal out here. So.
No, I believe you. I was thinking there was a couple of years in between. The ice storm was in 98.
Red River flood is 97.
So they were planning during the Red River flood when that started. They were planning on taking a brigade from Petawawa and going out to Gagetown in New Brunswick to train, and they ended up turning their advance element around. And Hillier recalled them to Petawawa and sent them to Red River. And
basically it was like he knew that if they started going, they weren't going to get turned around.
Yeah,
so he kind of made a decision on the spot.
Good foresight on that.
Yeah.
I did really like when they were in Red River, though, that his mentality was like, we're here to save people and property. Everybody gets to do that. Everybody's filling sandbags.
Yep.
And
I was go ahead.
I was gonna say everybody that chirped him about that got told like, well, you go fill sandbags, and if you can figure out a better way to do it, then like I don't know if it was one of the officers, like a general that was in charge of Land Force West, or if it was maybe it was CDS at the time. Somebody came out to check on what Hillier was doing with rare flooding, and they're like, "Oh, if you move these troops around and you do this instead, you fill the bags full." And he's like, "Yeah, how about you get over here and you do it for a while?" And the guy's like, I think it might have been the CDS at the time. He's like, "Yeah, you know what, Rick, you've actually got a pretty good idea about how to do this. We're just going to keep doing it your way."
Yeah.
It's like
funny how that happens.
But everybody gets to do the job, and he wasn't above doing the job that the troops were doing, which I think again is like that servant leadership piece, knowing what all the guys do, which when it comes time to do like unit inspections and stuff is going to suck when he's like talking about like, oh, I did a tour of the tank, and he's talking like some random tank driver, like what his job entails. What would it be you say you do here exactly? So like hours later, after he's had that conversation with everybody in a regiment about how their tank works and what their job is, I can see like, yeah, people's patience on that's probably going to wear thin. But when it comes time to like, okay, everybody's filling sandbags. Yeah, everybody's just going to fill sandbags. Because like the dude knows what he's doing, and he knows what the job is, and he knows like, he understands what you're doing because he's willing to do the work. Right. Like even though he's an officer, even though he's running a unit, even though he's a chief of the land staff or whatever position of authority he's in, he's not some regular private soldier that's like, all right, I guess we're filling sandbags in the rain today. Like, oh yeah, I'm running the show, and like I'm also going to go fill sandbags while I run the show.
It sounded like he was a guy who never asked his guys to do something that he wouldn't do, and he showed that on a few
I think
times.
Is why as many people liked him as they did, right? Hillier had a reputation of being very well respected in the military. I don't think he gives himself enough credit for some of that stuff in the book, but I think some of the examples to draw from that, though, like that he is willing to go and like, oh yeah, I'm running the operation, but also I'm going to go fill sandbags with the boys.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, we're going to go and do like ice storm stuff in Ottawa, but I'm also going to go out and help deal with like down power lines and things. We're going to make sure that all of these various agencies are coordinating and working together, and we're going to just go with them to whatever their job is that they're doing.
Yeah. One part I found interesting was him talking about the Oka crisis, and the one that was before that was not, I can't remember, but yeah. He only touched on it briefly, but he was kind of there for that. And
yeah, he was there for a lot of stuff, but I mean, like that's a long career, right?
Yep. You see it all from at least a perspective.
Well, I think it's a good perspective. I think a lot of his stuff came down to relationships, which I think is another one of those big themes from the book, is like the way he was able to get stuff done in Bosnia as a troop commander, or later as like, I think he was in charge of Sector Southeast, whatever the Canadian sector was in Bosnia, he was in charge of at one point. And I think he ended up being in charge of all of the international troops in former Yugoslavia at one point. And the reason he got all of the things accomplished in former Yugoslavia that he got done was not because he was a particularly good soldier or particularly good general. It was because he was willing to make good relationships with all of the other multinational leaders, to be like, oh, we're going to work with this guy from, I forget where the problem child was that he was working with, from France, maybe. I think he was a French general. And the French general was not speaking English on conference calls with other section or sector commanders, and would get mad at Hillier afterwards because people would agree to things on the phone, and this poor French general couldn't keep up with what was going on. And he was just like getting the brunt of, well, all of these people around me are making decisions and telling me how to do my job and what to do, and there's a language barrier, and we're using French troops to do these things, but like I don't really get a say in what my guys are doing. So like Hilliard being able to work with this guy and work through some of these problems and build some of the relationships where it's like, yeah, we're making good decisions for your troops too. We're not just giving you like the worst possible assignments. We're trying to make sure that everybody works together to be successful for the overall mission and put away some of those national boundaries to get things done. And same thing in Afghanistan with ISAF. Running the ISAF mission in Afghanistan in 2004. He's working very closely with the British and American forces, and there's a couple of other multinational units there. But the reason he got along so well with the Americans was because of all the time that he spent at Fort Hood in Texas working with 3 Corps on an exchange program. So he's taken all of the opportunities he's had when he went for his, I think it was his master's degree that he did in Toronto, and his exchange programs that he did with the Americans, and working in Bosnia with multinational coalition, and working in Afghanistan with a multinational coalition. And it was all of the relationship building that he had done prior to or early in those operations and those taskings, where he's like, I'm going to go make friends with these people. And then sometimes years later, those friendships and existing relationships being a thing that he can leverage for operational success. See, like, super relaxed guy, very laid back, very much like wants to be everybody's friend, but then being able to cash in on that relationship later to be like, well, hey, Dutch people, we need a lift with the helicopters. Oh, but I happen to have this really good relationship with these Dutch people, and we send Christmas cookies, and my wife's friends are their friends, and right. So I think that's a big theme through the book. Is it's really building. I'm going to call them meaningful relationships, lasting and meaningful relationships. Not necessarily he was just using people to get something in the short term, but that he was like, oh, well, we have this thing. If it'll help you, you can use this thing. Or I'm going to go to Fort Hood in Texas and work with 3 Corps and make all these relationships and learn how to do how the Americans do all their like division level training, which a thing in Canada in the middle 90s, we're not doing division level training. We're barely doing company level training. We're just doing little tiny exercises with little tiny groups of troops. We're not doing it with 10,000 people.
So I got a question. Based on some of the, obviously, the information that he's laid out in his autobiography, what would you say has changed with the military? Because it kind of sounds like, yeah, all of those things are, kind of shitty in comparison. Like quite a few of those things are shitty in comparison to other, allied nations, troop capacity or whatever you want to call it, military prowess. But I mean, I'm under the impression that we're still kind of a lacking military.
I'd say we
power.
are very much lacking, and we're still, I would think, we're still catching up on a lot of the cuts that were made through the 1990s. Okay. I think our military was very much devastated under Chrétien and Martin. And I think it's the foresight of officers like
Trudeau, Chrétien, and Martin, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean,
first Trudeau, Chrétien, and Martin.
Yes, but no, and I disagree for a weird reason. And it's not because it's not necessarily because you're wrong. I don't think that Trudeau the Senior helped, but I don't think Trudeau the Senior made significant cuts to the military spending either. It was very much status quo. This is what we had in the beginning of 1960. This was very much what we had in like the beginning of 1970. There was it was stagnation, I think, more than anything else under Trudeau. It was not like the decade of darkness in the 90s, which is right, like force reductions, no new equipment, no spending, no money for training, no infrastructure spending. We closed a lot of facilities in the late 80s through the early part of the 2000s. There was a lot of closing and consolidating of Canadian Forces bases and stations and detachments. So they very much reduced the footprint of the Canadian Forces in Canada. What I will discredit Trudeau the Senior with, though, is the amount of contempt that the Canadian populace had for our military from about 1960 to 1975, 1980. I think if Trudeau the Senior had not been in power, or maybe if the military had been run differently in the post World War II era, especially in through the early 1960s after Korea, I think our country kind of forgot that we have a military.
I kind of still think that that's been a thing though. Like the there's not been any kind of military pride that, we're
Yes, but I mean, reading through what Hillier says, it has gotten a lot better
I'm
through the
sure.
global war on terror.
Yeah, I think
That's
though,
fair.
like well, since Canada became its own country just after, well, completely separated ourselves from the British in between World War One and World War Two. We've downplayed a lot of our military. That's why we have so many monuments and things to World War One, but we have next to nothing for World War Two. We have
I think that's fair.
nothing for the things in between. It's been
Well, we
so
have nothing for
downplayed,
Korea.
and
Like
so
there's nothing
no,
for
zero.
Korea.
Well, so,
Zero.
and to be
Like
fair,
most people don't even know we went to Korea.
you're
Well,
right.
because we sort of
Well, I mean,
didn't, but we did. Yeah, we definitely did.
well, okay, so go to Hamilton, Ontario, and there's a ship that's there on display. That ship sailed in the Korean War. My great uncle was on it. And like you're right, there's a lot of things, but I think that one of the reasons why Canada glorifies World War One is just because that is kind of what put this Canada on the international map, like, and pushed Canada forward as, like they signed the Treaty of Versailles as their own country rather than as a colony and Britain representing them, right? So, and Canada went as, their own, well, they went
No,
as like
we went
a decent
we went as
military
our own
power.
country, but we were still like we were told by the British what to do and where to go.
For sure. But I
Yes.
mean, it was still the Canadians did quite a bit of work in World War
Oh,
One,
I
right?
totally
So,
agree,
and
and
I
we had
think
some
that
really good generals on that one too.
yeah, and I think that is what kind of opened the door for Canada to become, you know, to break free from British, I guess, direction. But I mean,
I think that was a big one.
yeah,
I think that was a big one, and I think this is one of those multinational force things. If you go at World War II, I think is a good example of this, and Korea to a lesser extent. We were allowed to operate as a nation,
mhm,
but we were supporting other multinational
yes,
elements. So it's not like some of the nonsense that happened in Bosnia, where it's like, well, there's Canadians here and there's Canadians there, and it's all these little subunits and like small detachments of troops. It's the Canadian Expeditionary Force. We're sending like 10,000 people to go deal with this.
yeah, yeah,
It's a different scale than like, oh, we're going to go to Bosnia and we're going to send a bunch of different regiments and then we're going to break them up. So we have like company size elements spread out all over this
yeah.
country.
Well, and the other side of it too, though, is I do think that there's this, like, I'm really disappointed in the leadership of Canada for a number of reasons, but growing up in a more civic-minded family, with individuals, quite a few individuals that have served, um, I'm really disappointed at the lack of emphasis put on in terms of, prideful remembrance and prideful, elevation of that being um, a good, proud thing to do as a Canadian, and whether that's because we live too close to the US, where that's a celebrated, family pride thing to have somebody, to have that heritage in your family, right, of service. And um, what I think a lot of people don't realize is the military provided and still does provide a really good economic um, or life-changing adjustment for some people. Like you talk the East Coast.
I think now, post 2000s, post global war on terror, I think there was
Yeah.
definitely a period of time in the 90s where that was not the case.
And
Yep.
and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but you talk about even before that, like the 70s and 80s, even before that, that was still a good economic move for
And that's
people,
what I mean. I
even
think there
just to
was a lot
get
of
you
people.
out of, even to just get you out of the lifestyle that you were in,
I
right?
think
It was an
in the
opportunity.
1970s, there was still a lot of opportunity to go into the
Yeah.
military and go and get skills and go and like
Yeah.
see other parts of the country that you would not otherwise normally
Yeah.
see if you were from
And
some small town in Conception Bay, Newfoundland.
absolutely.
You might not get to see Comics BC or Edmonton
But
or
also, like
Toronto.
some of these small towns, like folks didn't have the capacity to get out of these small towns and they were
Well, that's what I'm
destined to
saying. So I think
be,
there was a lot of opportunity the military afforded with that up until the late 1980s. And
well,
there's a big period where that was not the case. And I think we are now finally 2022, well,
yeah.
2023 next week. We are now finally at the point where the military is again a viable career choice. I think there was definitely a period if you wanted to go do cool army guy stuff in the early 2000s, the PPCLI had a spot for you.
Yeah. Well, but I still think, I agree with what you're saying, but I still think that as a national element, we as the people are not encouraged to be supportive of that and
No,
to
we're not.
be, like it's looked at as, oh, a public service thing. It's not looked at as an element of pride, as an element
It's
of, sorry, go
it's
ahead.
barely even a public service thing. Go on.
Well, yeah, and it's,
At least it's not seen that way.
yeah, and I think that that's part of the problem is that even
Yep.
now, like people are not going to join, well, because the government's a douche nozzle, but like there's, I don't know. I have my own thoughts on it, but I'm not,
No,
I'm kind of a bystander here, right? Like I just think
I think
that
those are fair points.
I
think
think that
those are
the
fair
whole
points.
pride thing is very instrumental and it is not, it's
Well, I
not
think
provided.
there are officers like Hillier,
Yeah.
like Walt Nanchiak, that there are people of that vintage. They joined the military in the middle 70s, the early to middle 70s, that got into the senior ranks of the military that have ended up as chiefs of forces, the land staff, the air staff, the naval staff, the chief of defense, with maybe a couple of recent exceptions. There's been a lot of senior leadership in the Canadian forces of that same vintage. I think Wayne Iyer is one of those people, the current CDS.
Okay.
Vance before Nanchiak, who was in a bunch of the same units and around the same time as Hillier. They traded units back and forth a bunch. Baril O'Donnell. When was McDonnell?
Maybe.
There was definitely a chief defense staff. There was a Navy guy named McDonald. He was the CDS before
I don't
Iyer.
I don't know if O'Donnell was a CDS, but he was one of the guys that Hillier talked about highly. They kind of followed him around.
Yeah, I think he was at one point the commanding officer of the Royal Canadian Dragoons after Hillier. There's a bunch of these senior leaders in the military that joined in the early to middle 70s that ended up in very senior positions in National Defense Headquarters in the 2000s. And I think they are specifically the reason for I'm going to say the resurgence in pride in our military. And a lot of that is those domestic operations, which I think I feel cast our military in a different light than they should be. Like the Red River flooding, the ice storm stuff. There's been other humanitarian aid domestic missions that have gone on where our military has been involved. The Toronto snowstorms in what was that? That was like 04 or 05. They were driving APCs around and using them in place of Toronto ambulances. There's definitely occasions where we've done domestic humanitarian aid using our military in those capacities, and they've done a a fantastic job. And I think that's a direct reflection of leaders like Hillier.
But
'Cause they
those are
can-
some things too that also are just not being amplified as
Well, and I
a
think
reason to be.
they're not amplified. And the thing that concerns me with those is that it makes the average person think that the military is there to like fill sandbags when the river floods or drive armored personnel carriers when ambulances can't get around in snowstorms.
Or
But
move
that
trucks
is-
out of Ottawa.
It's like,
yeah,
yes,
there's
the,
that
the
too.
army can do that, but like the army is supposed to shoot people. That's
But
like
Yes.
here's the thing though, is that
diplomacy by
kind of,
other means.
but that kind of is the purpose of the army in peacetime and when we are, like not in active war. So folks understanding that there's this duality to the military, I think would be really helpful, because I do think that it would help foster this idea of, both this force to be reckoned with in protectiveness, but also this humanitarian and very community centric concept. And that duality is a really good thing to have come together. And that does feed into that pride that's necessary, because unfortunately, without that pride, you're never going to see the Canadian military to be at the level that it needs to be at without getting the people of Canada behind it, celebrating it. And I don't
I think
mean an
that's fair.
idolization of it, but there is some of this, like in Canada, we really have nothing that anchors us to a national pride, right? Nothing.
No, we really haven't.
And unfortunately, the folks in the South,
I've
the
got
south
one.
of us, well, the folks to the south of
Manitoba is not
us,
something to be proud of.
No, I was talking with the Freedom Convoy. I've never felt more Canadian.
oh, absolutely. I agree with that.
But anyway,
No,
as far as militarily, 100%. We don't have
yeah,
any.
but I also think aside from that, something that nationally can be recognized is, and I don't think that it helps that we do have the folks to the South who, again, it's part of their not just national pride to have an advanced military that they, absolutely will tell anybody in the world that we are the biggest and the best in the world. And, I don't know enough about militaries of the world, but they do pretty good. And there's this other side of it too, where it's not just their national pride, but it's also their community pride. It's their family pride, and it's become very intrinsic in their culture to be proud and to be, to recognize that kind of thing. And that is very unifying.
I
Right?
think that's going away a little bit though, even in the States.
Yeah, it is too. It is.
I think that outside of the cities, you're correct.
Yeah.
In the cities, I don't think that there's
It's because
This is-
cities
this
are
is very
an
much
overall
is-
feeling like that anymore.
This is very much a divisional issue in westernized countries. So we have a sort of a general problem, and I think Hillier does a good job with this. We have a lot of people that go into the military because they don't see a lot of other I'm going to call them good options for
Yeah.
careers.
Yeah.
Right. So that they can go into the military because it's an option for a career. It's not necessarily an
Mhm.
option that they like, but it's better than living in a trailer park and doing meth or
Yeah.
whatever the like other
Or bricklaying.
welfare state example is. Well, I don't know. Bricklaying is an honorable trade. I don't know how much.
So is going in the army, and it's
Mm,
Yeah. No, but I get what you're saying. Like, especially when you've got active recruiters going out to these small communities, understanding that that's where they're going to get some of their biggest recruitment numbers. Right. And that's a good conversation.
There is something for that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, and we already touched on it, Eastern Canada, and I would say not just Eastern Canada, obviously prevalent, but, more rural or
Well, I think
remote places.
this is part of this like larger urban rural divide, right? People in large urban centers, I have a great deal of disdain for because they live in large urban centers. These are the people that drive electric cars and don't participate in democracy the way that I would like them to.
Yeah, I actually, I was kind of thinking about this the other day, and it's off topic, but kind of maybe not, is that when you live in large urban centers, and this could be an extreme judgment, like, and blanket statement, but
I'll
folks
allow
that, Perfect. But when folks live in large urban centers, there seems to be a little bit more of an echo chamber effect and a little bit more of a dissociation from the other elements that kind of make up a society, right? They, go to the grocery store, they go to
Well, I
their
think
job, they go to, their entertainment, and they don't really understand the implications of how those things come to them, right?
it's the
It's a disconnect.
it's like the derastinated economic unit. You get the goods and services, you live in the pod, you eat the bugs.
Yeah.
The matrix is piped in so that you get the entertainment and the reality, and you have it. I don't think it's just that echo chamber, it's that you have no, or maybe not no, that's unfair to people in Toronto. You have fewer meaningful relationships, even though there's
Yeah.
a greater population density. You don't know your neighbors. You don't
Y-
know the other 10,000 people at the concert, but there were concerts. You
Yeah.
have the option for world-class dining, but you don't ever get to meet or know the chef. You don't know the person
Absolutely.
that's cooking for you, but you get but
Yeah.
the food, there's so many options for food.
Well, but that's part of it too, because a similar argument could be said about, like the smallness of, uh, well, I guess the scope of, I guess the influence in or out in rural areas as well, like, however, I think that when folks live in rural areas, they are way more interconnected to all the webs and systems that create a community.
Well, and
The
then that's what I
average
mean. The
person,
difference between the rastinated and derastinated economic unit, and
I'm not
in the
really
big
familiar
urban,
with that
well, it's a
word or
big
theme.
urban center. Um, you live in your apartment, you live in your socialist hellscape, and the goods and or services get delivered to you by the guy on the Amazon truck. And if you want to
Yeah.
go out and partake in community, you buy a ticket to an event, a sporting event or concert or what have you.
Yeah.
And you go, and there are lots and lots of other people that you don't know and are not really going to interact with in a meaningful way. Whereas when you live in a more rural or a smaller or a less urban community, you know the guy that drives the truck that brings the groceries to the grocery store. You know the
Yeah.
pastor at your church that you go
And
to, that your parents
you're
went to.
likely
That
volunteering
right,
or
and this is, I think,
engaged
this is this
in those
engagement with
elements too.
these different webs
Yeah.
of, and I think that's because of not that the smaller communities are more connected, but that you know the people in those
Yes.
communities and you know them better. And
Yeah.
it's not, even though you're not living in the apartment block in the socialist hellscape with the 10,000 other economic units, that you don't know the people that live left and right, up and down of your little hovel.
Well, I think it's like an avoidance thing, right?
I think it absolutely is.
You can avoid
I think it's a
people.
cultural thing.
Yeah, but you can
So-
avoid people if you're uncomfortable with whether or not they speak the same language as you or live the same life as you, because maybe they don't come from the same background as you, or they don't come from the same foundation.
This is the socialist hellscape problem, though.
Yeah.
We have all of these.
But it's all about it's a mindset thing. So like
I agree.
since I've been married, we lived in an apartment for a while, and then we lived in a condo for a while. And in both of those places, we had great communities because we went out and did it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
I agree.
Like we went out and we knocked on all the doors down our hallway, and we introduced ourselves, and we invited people over for suppers, and we talked to them in the hallway. And it wasn't just nod and leave and nod and leave, like when you see them on the stairs.
You had meaningful conversations and built relationships that you could leverage in the future.
But I will say that is the exception and not the rule. Now,
I know, I'm just saying, like I just want to encourage people who do live in the socialist hellscape that you can still create great community in your place. You just have to go do it. Get off your ass and stop playing video games and watching porn and go do something.
But that's a big thing, is that, like that theme right there of the way that you and your wife lived out community. It was very common in, like, up until probably the 60s. No, but probably like the 60s, 70s. But then as you start getting into, like, sexual revolution and like freedom and hippie and like all these things, there's a lot more of like me, right? And I think that what ends up happening is a lot of isolating ends up happening, because you can only get so in depth and engaged in yourself before you become very dissatisfied, and you see kind of like social breakdowns when that starts to happen. And I think it's the same as, I think it's all interconnected with like mindset and culture and everything like that. And, at the end of the day, I still stand by that. Like, we are a deconstructed community. We are a deconstructed, family system,
Family unit. Yep.
and our government is shit. So it's pretty much where I stand.
All right. One quote that I'm going to read from the book, and then we're going to call it the end of book club.
There you go.
I very much enjoy this. This is very much in the same vein. It's relationship building.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the overarching theme in the book is it's the relationship building. And I mean, it's what Peter said about him and his wife. It's, we got posted to 3 Corps in Fort Hood. Well, we're going to go and meet a bunch of other people, and we're going to have them over for dinner. And I'm going to take over as the commanding officer of this thing, and I'm going to have all the subalterns, the most junior of officers, over to my house for dinner every week. Not a thing Hillier did, a thing that Hillier had done to him as a new junior officer on his first posting. His CO had all the subalterns, all the brand new officers over for dinner on like a regular basis.
That's amazing.
Right. But this is what I mean, though. It's the building the relationship, building the community, and understanding what other people want or need to get their job done, and how you can enable your people to do good work to get the job done, so that when you have to go to, I don't know, say Bosnia or Afghanistan, some of those people, and you know how to work with some of those people, and you have a common mission set, and you can go and do these things. So talking about a briefing with a bunch of the senior advisors and senior officers looking at becoming generals, we had internalized a command philosophy. 4 things I talked about all the time: assess your situation, use your common sense, work hard, and look after your people.
That's a good one.
I feel like that really sums up the book. Like that was, I don't want to say I have it highlighted, because I wouldn't defile a book like that, but that I have a big bold post-it note. Read this part here.
Yeah.
It's like that. All of the other stuff kind of anecdotal, but that really, those 4 points
sums it up.
That could be applied to just about anything.
But it is really applicable, which is, I mean, that's really kind of the point of book club, is what can we glean from these books to use in other, because I'm never going to be in a position, fingers crossed, I'm never going to be in a position where I have to run ISAF in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But I probably have to get some stuff done with some people that I kind of know.
Yeah.
So how can I leverage some of those relationships in a
and it's a long
environment?
It's a long game. And that's kind of the thing that a lot of people don't realize, especially because we have been conditioned to instant gratification world, is this idea of, you're not just doing this because you now recognize that there is a need for you to manipulate a situation to get what you need out of it, right? No, you have to be building relationships from the get-go. You have to be looking at those principles all the time. And then what happens is, when the time comes that you need to resource some of those people, it's not a challenge. It's because you've invested into them and they've invested into you. And it's this relationship and this community. And a lot of folks aren't willing to do the long game.
Well, that's because the long game is hard and not guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're going to get hurt every now and then along the way.
Yeah.
You may or may not go into Afghanistan and almost lose your empire. You just, as a general rule, you just shouldn't go to war in Afghanistan. It never works out well for anyone except Afghanistan.
Or the Ukraine.
I don't know. Have a lot of empires been broken on the back of Ukraine? Because
more empires have been broken in the back of Afghanistan, for sure. More people have died in Ukraine.
All right. I mean, that's a scale problem, but that's fine.
No.
You don't commit
Such a
land wars with
complicated-
Russia in the winter, and don't invade Afghanistan.
Yes.
That's fair.
These are like military tactics that have held true through the ages. All right, I think that more or less rounds out the book. I had more post-it notes than that, but I think we hit all of the big points. Oh, maybe one very small aside. If you're going to get deployed, agree with your wife. Just let her do whatever. Or I guess if you're
Yeah, that was a good point. Yeah,
if you're getting
if she
married,
says if you have a spouse and you're leaving them behind and going on deployment, and they call you and say, "Hey, the fridge broke." Okay. Well, it's got warranty, so why don't you? No. I bought a new fridge. Okay, sounds great. That was the best option.
Perfect.
Never mind that it was on warranty and we'll get money for it, and you threw it already. It's all good. You did the best thing. Just agree. It's gonna make your life better.
just agree. Just let your wife do what she's going to do.
Yep, because you're over there and she's back home.
I'm oversimplifying, but there is a really good refrigerator story near the beginning of the book, and it's just whatever is happening at home, just be supportive and let it happen, and go and do the thing that you need to do when you're not at home.
Yeah,
and let home run itself, and just be agreeable to that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe
So,
that.
I mean, Rick Hillier's marriage tips and advice for how to invade Afghanistan in one handy novel.
Yeah, that is accurate.
I like it.
All right. If you want to come and hang out with us, tell us all about the things that I didn't cover in the book, because we didn't cover like a girthy section of the book. We've hit on the highest of lights.
Yeah, but
good, then I still have more to enjoy when I read it.
I was gonna say you are literally the only one that has actually read the full book.
The Afghanistan stuff is so good. There is so much like geopolitics stuff about how Afghanistan, because like I read about Bosnia, but I don't know about Bosnia. Like I know of Bosnia, but I don't.
Sure.
But like Afghanistan is a cultural touchstone that I actually have. Like I know guys that have been in Kandahar, and I understand how politics got done. And I get, like, I remember watching when Ahmed Karzai got elected into being their PM, right? So it's not just like Bosnia is kind of an abstract concept for me, right? Like I wasn't alive during Bosnia. I don't really get it. I know people that have been to Bosnia, but it's abstract. Afghanistan is a concept I understand.
We were alive. We were just children.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When was that? 80.
It was early 90s and very late 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it was. Yeah.
And
so I don't have recollections of that. But no, Afghanistan, I get. Afghanistan, I remember seeing on the news. Afghanistan, I remember working for people that had been to Afghanistan. And like I get that.
I have friends that have been there. Yep.
So if you want to come and argue with us, the best place to do that is going to be on Gilded. But if you want to send us your hate mail, you can do that by sending an email to feedback@canadianpatriotpodcast.com. And if you happen to know General Hillier, I'd be happy to have him on the show.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
It's a small world. Somebody probably knows somebody that probably knows somebody.
Yeah.
Is he related to the other Hilliers, like the politician Ontario Hilliers?
I don't know.
I do not know. I strongly doubt it, but I do not know.
I mean, there can't be that many of them.
I don't know.
Probably not. Those guys are Ontario.
I don't know.
He was Newfoundland, so
not sure. Let's go around though. Peter, where may everyone find you?
I'm on the Twitter sphere and Instagram at the Moran Life. That's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Liz, where can everybody find you?
I'm on Instagram at the Rebel Wanderer, and I'm sometimes on Gilded, but not really.
Me too. I have a different Instagram.
I've been on it like
I'm occasionally on Gilded.
I was on Discord so much. I've been on Gilded like 3 times.
If you post a funny meme on Gilded, I'd probably give you a laugh react.
That's fair. I don't think I have any notifications set up for social media. I really struggle
Oh, me
That's
to
neither.
do social
probably
I turn
media.
it all off.
best. Just turn it
Yeah.
off, and then when you feel like doing it, you just go do it.
That's pretty much what I do.
Exactly.
That's pretty
It's
much
not a
what I
good
do.
marketing strategy. There are content people that are listening to this that are like probably freaking out and screaming that like you need to have constant interaction. You can't, but like, nah, man.
No. No.
You want to
Go
make
touch
your
some
life
grass.
calmer. You want to, yeah, you want to have a better day-to-day experience. Just turn off all the notifications on your phone, or
Mhm.
just turn the whole phone off. That also a good because things that happen inside the tiny glowing box don't really matter.
I know. It's true.
Except the Canadian Patriot podcast, and don't miss.
Well,
an
yeah,
episode.
if you want to watch us on your tiny glowing box, wait, what?
Yeah.
If you've listened to the show this long, you certainly deserve a discount code. Use the Boxing Day promo Patriot at checkout. It's also good the other 364 days out of the year. 364. No,
364, and sometimes 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, all of the days that are not Boxing Day, you can also use the discount code Patriot at checkout. If you could help me overwhelm the local Canada post office, I would really appreciate that. So maybe we could ship like 100 orders tomorrow. That'd be super cool. I have to apologize to Rod Giltacker. Rod does not usually join us for book club. He specifically said that he was very, very busy due to the holiday festive season. He was not able, despite having the extra month, able to finish Rick Hillier's book. So we'll try to get Rod on next week to talk about a new year, a new you, all of our goals for 2023. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Rod's goals are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wait, that's going to be January 1st, isn't it? The Monday?
Is it really?
Second. It's the second.
You're right.
Okay.
The
first is Sunday.
Thank God. That's good because I'm going to be mildly inebriated.
I'm going to be on an airplane at 6 a.m. on the 1st. I will not be ringing in
the first is Sunday for sure.
Well, that's
second.
Fine. Just go ahead and text me your list and I'll read it. I'll do my very best Liz impression. Jiu-jitsu, farming.
Yeah.
I'll be back on the second. I'll be back on the second. But I mean, I'll skip it just to see you do a me impression.
No. If you're going to be available, by all means, you should do it yourself. It's better if you do it. For all of our listeners out there in podcast land, I'd like to remind you that you are a small fringe minority with unacceptable